The guard grabbed my wrist, and that's when my daughter shook her head at me like I didn't belong there. I wasn't supposed to hear it, but her mic was still live when she said, "Don't let her inside." They locked the door in my face, so I sat in my car and signed something that made them panic. I had 5 minutes before my daughter signed everything away, and she wouldn't even look at me. I thought I was being turned away until my phone lit up with a contract already signed in my name. She smiled while security pushed me into the rain, and I realized she thought I was powerless. I almost left until a stranger called me and asked, "Did she sign yet?" The moment I saw my signature on that document, I knew someone had been planning this for days. The guard grabbed my wrist just as I reached for the glass door, and I heard my daughter say something inside that made her flinch before she shook her head at me like I was the problem. Rain streaked down the front of the building, blurring the chandeliers into soft gold smears, and I stood there in heels that were already slipping against the pavement while two more staff members shifted closer without being asked, like they'd been waiting for me specifically. I told him there had to be a mistake, that my daughter was right there, but he didn't even look at her, just tightened his grip slightly and said my name wasn't on the list in a tone that sounded rehearsed. Through the glass, I could see her mother-in-law lean in toward someone with a clipboard, murmuring something that made him nod before he checked a tablet and glanced directly at me. And that was the moment I realized this wasn't confusion. It was coordinated. My daughter finally looked up, just for a second, and mouthed something I couldn't hear over the rain, but I knew what it meant when she didn't move to fix it. I stepped back under the overhang, pulling my arm free, trying to steady my breathing while the cold from the rain soaked through the hem of my dress. And that's when I noticed the small black speaker clipped near the doorway still humming faintly, picking up voices from inside that weren't meant for me. Someone laughed sharp, controlled, and then a woman's voice cut through clearer than it should have, low but deliberate, saying, "Make sure her mother doesn't get past the door." And even without seeing her face, I knew exactly who it was. My chest tightened, not from embarrassment, but from the way it landed too clean, like a final decision already made hours before I got there. I reached for my phone without thinking, my fingers damp, and saw a missed call from an unknown number just minutes earlier, followed by a message that hadn't been there when I left my car. "Do not leave. She hasn't signed yet." I stared at it longer than I should have, the words settling into something heavier the more I read them, because whoever sent it knew exactly where I was and what was happening inside. I looked back through the glass and saw a small table being set near the center of the room, a folder placed carefully on top of it, and my daughter being guided toward it with a hand resting lightly on her shoulder, not forceful but firm enough that she didn't resist. The music shifted, softer now, like the room was closing in on something important, and I felt that same pressure build in my chest as I watched her hesitate just before reaching for the pen. My phone buzzed again in my hand, the same number calling this time, and I answered without thinking, pressing it to my ear while keeping my eyes locked on her. And the man on the other end didn't introduce himself or ask who I was. He just said, calm and steady, "If she signs that, you won't be able to undo it," like he expected me to understand exactly what he meant. I swallowed, asking who this was and how he knew any of this, but he ignored both questions and told me to look up, and when I did, I saw a figure standing behind the second-floor glass, already watching me, phone raised to his ear at the exact same angle. For a second, I forgot about the rain, the guards, everything, because the way he stood there made it clear this wasn't something unfolding. It was something already set in motion. I lowered my voice without meaning to, asking him what she was about to sign, and he paused just long enough to make my stomach drop before saying, "Something that already has your name on it." And inside, my daughter finally picked up the pen. My daughter mouthed, "Please go," but her eyes were begging me to stay. They thought keeping me out would stop me, until I realized I didn't need to get inside to destroy it. My breath caught as her pen hovered over the paper, and I said her name louder than I meant to. But the man on the phone cut through it, sharper now, telling me I was already out of time, and to check the document he had just sent before I did anything else. I pulled the phone away with shaking fingers, opening the file as rain slid off my hair onto the screen, and the moment it loaded, my stomach dropped, because it wasn't just similar to what was on the table inside. It was identical, down to the placement of the signature that was already sitting next to my printed name. I froze under the overhang, staring at it, because the signature looked exactly like mine, not forged badly or rushed, but precise in a way that meant it had come from something real, something I had actually signed. The man's voice lowered, controlled but urgent, asking if I recognized it, and I didn't answer because I did, not the document itself, but the shape of the signature, the slight tilt at the end I only made when I was distracted. My mind started pulling at the last few days, flipping through moments I hadn't questioned at the time. The courier envelope left with my assistant, the stack of papers I signed between calls, the quick, standard authorization, explanation I barely listened to. And suddenly those small, forgettable details didn't feel separate anymore. I looked back inside and saw my daughter hesitate again, her fingers tightening around the pen like she was forcing herself to go through with it. And just behind her, her mother-in-law leaned in close, saying something I couldn't hear but didn't need to, because the effect was immediate. My daughter nodded once, stiff, like she'd just been reminded of something she didn't want to argue about. I pressed the phone back to my ear, asking him what this actually was, and he didn't soften it this time, telling me it was a transfer of controlling interest tied to assets currently still in my name, and that if she signed the final page inside, it would validate everything that had already been set up using my authorization. The word authorization hit harder than anything else, because it meant this wasn't a hack or a fake. It meant I had given them something real to work with. I stepped closer to the glass without thinking, ignoring the guard's movement beside me, and that's when I noticed something I hadn't before. A second folder, thinner, placed just off to the side. And when the man on the phone told me to look at the timestamp on the document I'd opened, my eyes dropped back to the screen and I felt my chest tighten as I saw it was processed less than 20 minutes ago. That didn't make sense, because I hadn't signed anything tonight, and when I said that out loud, he went quiet for half a second before asking me where my phone had been earlier that afternoon. The question landed wrong, too specific, and I replayed it automatically. Meeting, car, the brief moment I left it on the table while stepping out to take a call, and my grip tightened because that was the only window where I hadn't had it on me. Inside, my daughter finally lowered the pen, but instead of signing, she glanced toward the entrance again, her eyes scanning like she was looking for something or someone. And for a second, I thought she might be looking for me. But then her mother-in-law's hand pressed lightly against her back, guiding her forward again, not forceful, just constant enough that she didn't step away. I told the man they must have accessed something through my phone, but he cut me off, saying it wasn't just access, it was confirmation, and that whatever I had signed earlier had been activated tonight using a second layer I hadn't even noticed. My pulse spiked because that meant this wasn't impulsive or rushed. It was structured, built to trigger at a specific moment. And when I asked him who would set something like that up, he didn't answer directly, just told me to look at the witness line on the last page. I scrolled down, my thumb unsteady, and the second I saw the name printed there, everything in me went cold because it wasn't a stranger or a company or even her mother-in-law. It was my daughter. I snapped my head up so fast my vision blurred for a second, looking straight through the glass at her as she stood there holding the pen. And for the first time since I arrived, she met my eyes fully, not panicked or guilty this time, but something else entirely, something I couldn't place. And before I could process it, she lifted the pen again and moved it toward the line that would make it all permanent. I didn't think, I just moved, my heels slipping as I crossed the threshold the moment the guard didn't stop me. And I heard my own voice cut through the room as her pen touched the paper, sharp enough that it made her freeze mid-stroke and lift her head like something inside her had snapped. The music died almost instantly, conversations collapsing into silence, and every face turned toward me, but I didn't see any of them. I was staring at my daughter, at the way her hand hovered above the page, at the flicker of something in her eyes that wasn't panic anymore. I reached the table and pulled the folder toward me, flipping it open with hands that wouldn't stay steady, and there it was again. My name, my signature, the same timestamp, all of it sitting there like it had always belonged. I asked her what she thought she was doing, but my voice came out wrong, thinner than I expected, because I already knew this wasn't confusion anymore. She didn't answer right away, just looked at me in a way she hadn't since I got there, steady, almost calm, and that unsettled me more than anything else in the room. Behind her, her mother-in-law didn't step forward or interrupt, just watched quietly, like she didn't need to control anything anymore. I turned to the man who had been on the phone, now standing a few feet away, and demanded an explanation. But before he could speak, my daughter did, her voice low but clear enough that everyone heard it when she said, "You signed it 3 days ago." I shook my head instantly, telling her I didn't understand what she meant, but she didn't break eye contact, just slid the second folder, the thinner one I had barely noticed earlier, across the table toward me. My fingers hesitated before opening it, like I already knew I wasn't going to like what was inside. And when I finally looked down, the air left my lungs in one sharp pull because it wasn't just one document. It was a full authorization packet, every page carrying my signature, each one tied to a different piece of control I hadn't realized I was giving up. My mind raced through the last week again, but this time it wasn't scattered, it was clear. The courier envelope marked urgent, the assistant saying it needed to be signed before close of business, the follow-up call I cut short because I was late, the moment I didn't read past the header because I trusted the process more than I should have. I looked back up at her, trying to find something that made this make sense, and that's when she said it, quieter this time but somehow heavier. I didn't know what it was at first, but I knew you didn't either. The words landed wrong, like they were meant to hurt but not in the way I expected. And before I could respond, she continued, her voice tightening just slightly. They brought it to me yesterday, said it was already done, that you had agreed to move everything under my name. That this was how you were protecting it. I felt something cold settle in my chest because I could see the moment she stopped believing that in her expression, the shift from trust to doubt happening right in front of me. I asked her why she didn't call me, why she didn't say anything, but she looked down at the paper, at the line she had almost signed, and then back at me, and that's when I understood she had been trying to decide something long before I walked in. The man beside me stepped closer, quieter now, and said the part he hadn't said before. That once she signed, it wouldn't just transfer control. It would lock in every authorization attached to my name, including the ones I hadn't realized I gave. I turned back to her, telling her not to sign, that we could stop this, undo it. But even as I said it, I heard how uncertain it sounded, how much I didn't actually know. She watched me for a second longer, searching my face for something, certainty, maybe, or honesty. And when she didn't find it, something in her expression closed off just enough that I felt it. "If I don't sign," she said, her voice barely above a whisper now, "everything tied to you freezes by morning. They already made sure of that." I didn't ask how she knew, because I saw it in the documents spread across the table, in the structure I hadn't paid attention to, in the way every piece led to this exact moment. My hands dropped to my sides, useless, and for the first time since I got there, I realized this wasn't about stopping her anymore. It was about what I had already set in motion. She picked up the pen again, slower this time, giving me one last chance to say something that would change it, and I opened my mouth, but nothing came out that I could stand behind. The room stayed silent as she finished writing her name, the scratch of the pen louder than anything else. And when she stepped back, it was done, not just the transfer, but the illusion that I had ever been in control of it. I stood there looking at the pages, at the signatures that tied us both to something neither of us had fully understood, and it hit me in a way I couldn't push away. That she hadn't just signed because she trusted them. She signed because she didn't trust me enough to stop.